I've always loved horror stories, you know? My grandfather was an unparalleled teller of stories and stories about events in his life. At telling these stories, he was very good. Some of the stories he tells cause fear and distress. But nothing compares to what happened when I was about 10 years old, still very young. My parents misappropriated an old house in the middle of the countryside, a big place with more rooms than you can count, and a basement that gave me the creeps. I swear I always felt like someone was watching me at home, especially after dark. That's when things got the darkest. It all started on a Friday. Mom and Dad left for a work dinner, leaving me alone at home. I was relaxing, watching TV, when I heard a strange noise coming from the basement. It felt like something heavy being dragged. I froze, not knowing what to do. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my mind playing tricks, but the fear was real. The noise kept coming, knocking, scratching. It was as if something was climbing the basement stairs. I took a deep breath, gathered courage, and went to check the basement door. I turned the handle, opened it, and looked, but there was nothing. All I saw was darkness. I returned to the living room, trying to calm my nerves with my breathing heavily and my heart racing. Later that night, I heard heavy footsteps upstairs. My parents had not yet returned. Scared, I grabbed a flashlight and tiptoed up the stairs to avoid making noise. Every step felt like my heart was going to jump out of my chest with anxiety of what could be there. When I reached the hallway, I noticed that the guest room door was slightly open. The light was on, but I could have sworn I turned off all the lights downstairs. I entered the room. The place was freezing, as if winter had arrived early, and I was shivering. And then I saw her. In the corner, there was a shadowy figure, as if it were a human-shaped shadow or some big, tall animal standing there. Tall, thin, with those macabre eyes fixed on me. I screamed and ran away. I ran to my room, dove under the covers, and stayed where I was until my parents came back, drenched in sweat and fear, praying that the animal wouldn't appear in my room. When I told them what happened, they laughed and said it was all in my head. I was furious they didn't believe me, but I knew it wasn't my imagination. This shadowy figure was real, and she was still there, waiting. I never spent a minute alone in that house again after that. And even now, when I walk past the old guest room, I feel those eyes on me. Please like and subscribe if you are enjoying. Now we continue. This happened not long ago, and one Friday, my parents decided they were going to my late grandmother's house to organize and pick up some old things they needed. She had passed away a few months ago, and the house was far away, in a rural area, and needed some repairs before we could sell it. Ever since I was a child, that place gave me goosebumps. I've always heard stories about being haunted. They said that at night you could hear voices, and the noise of something being dragged on the walls outside the house. This was terrifying, but we didn't believe any of it. I had never seen or heard anything. As soon as we got there, I felt a shiver run through my body. It was as if the house or someone in the house was watching us. We went straight to the room. The air was heavy, full of dust, and the old musty smell was suffocating. My mother tried to remain calm, said everything would be fine, but the atmosphere was sinister. When it was time to sleep, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard a strange noise coming from the attic. It sounded like something scratching the floor, like long nails dragging across wood. I got scared and jumped out of bed and went out into the hallway. The sound continued, louder now, as if something was stuck and trying to get out. I didn't want to wake up my parents. I was afraid they would be mad at me, so I gathered courage and went to the attic alone. Each step creaked the floor, and the noise stopped the moment I opened the door. The attic was dark. You couldn't see anything. Only the moonlight came through the dirty windows. I looked around, but I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. I went back to bed, but the feeling of being watched was disturbing. I couldn't sleep easily anymore. I had to get up to go get some water. It was another tense atmosphere. The kitchen was 2 rooms away. I ran, grabbed the water, and ran back to the room. I lay there until I fell asleep. The next morning, I told my family about the noise, but everyone said I was imagining things after all. No one else heard it. We spent the day cleaning and organizing the house, and, as night fell, that feeling of being watched only grew stronger. But it was on the 3rd night that things got really scary. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. I had a nightmare where I was trapped in the attic, and something grabbed my legs, pulling me into the darkness with great hatred. When I opened my eyes, I saw a person in the corner of my room. He was tall, skeletal, with red eyes. I froze with fear. I couldn't scream. My voice wouldn't come out. I couldn't move. It felt like something was holding me back. The thing approached slowly and disappeared. I ran to my parents' room, told them everything that happened, but they said it was just a nightmare and everything was fine. "Just a nightmare, buddy," Dad said, trying to calm me down. "Go back to sleep, you'll be fine." I stayed awake the rest of the night, too scared to close my eyes and open them with that in front of me again. The next day, we decided to take a more in-depth look at the attic. We found an old wooden box, covered in dust and cobwebs, as if it had been there without being moved for many years. Inside were old photos, letters, and a diary. The photos showed my grandmother as a little girl, but there was something wrong. In several of them there was a shadow next to her, barely noticeable, but definitely present. The diary was disturbing. In it, Grandma described how she began to see the same shadowy figure that I saw. She wrote about sleepless nights, voices calling her name, and how she slowly began to lose her mind about it. The last entry was the worst. "He's here. I can't escape. He wants my soul." While we were reading the diary, we heard a scream coming from below. We ran downstairs and found my little sister, Emily, crying and shaking with fear. She said she saw a shadow that chased her around the house and felt like something was trying to grab her. "We need to get out of here now," Mom screamed in panic. We tried to open the door, but all the doors and windows were locked, as if some invisible force wanted to keep us inside. My father tried to break down the front door, but she didn't even move. Then the figure appeared again, this time in the hallway. It moved slowly, as if it were hunting us. Fear took over all of us. We ran to the attic, the only door that seemed open. We locked it behind us and remained silent, waiting for it to stop. We spent hours trapped in the attic, not knowing what to do and with no signal. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, we heard a car arriving. He was our uncle who was coming to visit us, and luckily he arrived early. We managed to open the attic window and scream for help. He was desperate and broke down the front door with a crowbar that he carries in the car and got us out of there. We left that cursed house, took what we needed, and only came back to sell it. We sold the place quickly, lowered the price without telling anyone what really happened there. To this day, I have nightmares about the events that occurred that night. And every time I think about Grandma, I wonder if she's still there, trapped in that house in spirit, fighting the same evil that almost destroyed us. I will even pray now in her name. This happened to me a few years ago when I was living in a small town in rural Nevada. I've never believed this UFO and ET stuff, but what happened that night changed my belief forever. That night the sky was clear. I was looking at the stars as usual. I was in the backyard, enjoying the tranquility, as I always did to relax. Out of nowhere, I saw a weird light on the horizon, but I thought it was an airplane. But the light started to move in a very strange way, a behavior that no airplane would do. So I started to get curious. I was intrigued and kept looking. The light was getting closer, and I realized it wasn't a plane, a helicopter, anything I knew. I was paralyzed, not knowing what to do. When suddenly a door opened on the side of the disc, and a bright blue light came out from inside. That's when I saw a humanoid coming out of that bright light. He was tall, with long arms and legs, and I was terribly terrified. The skin glowed in blue light. The big black eyes were fixed on me, but I had no pupil. It seemed that the being was trying to communicate without saying anything, and at the same time, I felt an enormous fear. I couldn't move. My mind was in chaos. The being reached out, and I felt like I was searching my mind. It was a horrible feeling, like they were messing with things that were just mine. After a few seconds, which seemed like an eternity, the animal, or thing, returned to the disc. The door closed and the object began to rise slowly, and in the blink of an eye, disappeared into space. I stood there, trying to understand what had just happened. I knew that I had witnessed one of the greatest events of my life. I literally had contact with an extraterrestrial. I went back inside the house, still in shock. I told to my mother. She was terrified, but at the same time she didn't believe it. He thought I was making it up, or maybe I had dreamed it. But I knew it was real. I saw, felt, and heard everything clearly, and I wasn't under the influence of any substance. To this day, I think about that night and what happened. I've never had another similar experience, but that one time was enough to change my view of extraterrestrial life. I'm no longer skeptical. Now I'm studying the subject to try to better understand what could have really happened that night. Did the being want something with me? That intrigued me. Or was it just a high? I'm here too. I always look up at the night sky, hoping and fearing that this encounter might happen again. But deep down, it was very exciting. This happened to me when I was 12 years old. I'm 24 now, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. It was an ordinary night, but what happened was anything but normal. At that time, I lived with my grandmother in an old house in the countryside. That house always had a heavy atmosphere, but we were used to it. My grandma liked to tell stories about ghosts and spirits, but I had never experienced or seen anything until that night. It was a Saturday. My grandma had gone to bed early, and I was in the living room, watching TV alone and eating something. Suddenly, all the lights went out for no reason. Power outages weren't rare in our area, so I went to get a candle. When I lit it, I heard a strange noise coming from the hallway. It sounded like someone was scratching the wall with a big object. "Grandma, is that you?" I called out, but there was no response. I went to her room to check if she was okay. As I walked down the hallway, the noise got louder, and it felt like the walls were closing in on me. A very strange and disturbing feeling. I felt a chill run through my body. When I got to her bedroom door, I saw it was slightly open. I pushed the door and went in, calling her again. The bed was empty. The open window let in a cold wind that made the curtains sway in a scary way. Then panic set in. Where could she be? Then I heard a faint voice. It seemed to be coming from the closet. I approached slowly and, with the candle in my hand, I opened the door. Nothing. The closet was empty, but the faint voice continued. I looked around, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned quickly, but no one was there. The faint voice turned into a low, disturbing laugh. I ran to the hallway, scared to death, and went to the kitchen, desperately looking for my grandma. In the kitchen, the lights were flickering, making the atmosphere even creepier. The laugh continued to echo through the house. I grabbed a crucifix that my grandma kept on the wall and started praying. I didn't know what else to do, and I was really scared. I wasn't religious, but at that moment, it was the only thing I could think of to try to get rid of it. Then, I heard footsteps coming from the living room. I held the crucifix tighter and went there like a priest ready for an exorcism. The room was empty, but I felt a presence, something I couldn't see but knew was there watching me. The laugh stopped, and everything went silent. Suddenly, the lights came back on. I looked around, but nothing was out of place. My grandma appeared at the door out of nowhere, looking confused. She said she had gone to the backyard to get firewood and didn't hear anything that happened. It was usual for her to get up several times during the night. "Grandma, something really strange happened in here," I said. She made the sign of the cross and said, "Oh, my child, this house has always been haunted. It's one of the spirits that have lived here for years." From that day on, I never doubted my grandma's stories. The house felt even heavier, and I could barely sleep. Not long after, we moved far away, and it never happened again. To this day, I think about that night and what that presence could have been. I don't know if it was a spirit or something else, but the feeling of fear and the disturbing laugh still haunt me. Please like and subscribe if you are enjoying.